Hello and welcome to Should You Watch? What's up? It's the show where we tell you if you should watch it or not. And we watched it, and that's how we know if you should. So we're going to share our thoughts. Alan, hello.
Hello, it's Alan and John from Chatzpod Television Podcast, doing the best dang job we can at recommending you shows, or not. Huh. That's the sort of mystery that we bring to you on Should You Watch, the number one Should You Watch podcast this side of the Chatzpod Television Podcast feed.
And this comes out every month. At the end of every month, we have a show. We tell you if you should watch it or not. And this month, the month of March, we watched the Amazon Prime exclusive television event, The Legend of Vox Machina, presented by Critical Role. Maybe you've heard of Critical Role. It's a Dungeons and Dragons live stream show that's been on the internet since, 2015 or so?
Yeah.
Quite a long time. It's been, I would say, central to the current landscape of D&D culture. You don't have to necessarily say that it's like responsible for it, but it's definitely played a huge role in the way that people are aware of D&D nowadays and talk about it and what they like about it and
Magellan,
all that stuff. Yes.
Would you say that it plays a critical role?
Oh my gosh. How did I miss that?
I walked you into that. I waltzed you into that.
How did I miss that?
Start the episode over. Hello and welcome to Should You Watch.
I've got a great joke for you tonight. Yeah, it's played a critical role in the D&D zeitgeist. And they went to Kickstarter and they said, hey, we want to turn some stuff from our first season from way back in 2015 into maybe an animated short or film, I think was the original pitch. And then it turned into having enough money by being super, super overfunded to turn it into a TV show, which is really cool. And it's awesome that somebody out there is living their literal nerd dream. It's great. And we're going to talk about it, tell you if you should watch it or not.
$12 million that Kickstarter made.
Ooh, wow.
$12 million.
The
Critical Role fandom is everywhere. If you are remotely nerdy, you know someone or you know someone who knows someone 100% who watches Critical Role regularly. There's almost a 100% chance of that.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in a certain age group. But yeah, it's huge. And, this also comes off the tail of and has led into the actual play podcast realm, which Michelle and I are both quasi-familiar with.
What's the extent of your familiarity with actual play type stuff?
I would say it's around 2016, 17 that I discovered Friends at the Table, which is Austin Walker and his friends podcast where they do this exact same thing with a greater focus on, I would say, like world building than like characters. There is a lot of character work and storytelling, but they also change tones every season. They've done like several sci-fi seasons, several fantasy seasons. I was listening to that one on and off, but my thing with actual play podcasts is not that I have a short attention span, but they really command your full attention because you're listening to people tell a story and play a game at the same time. So juggling both of those things and trying to remember like long-term plots is really hard for me. So I've like dropped in and out of Friends at the Table. I'm also familiar with The Adventure Zone. I've listened to some of the first season of that one, but it didn't catch my fancy too much. And I know it's gotten better and worse since then. But other than that, I don't think off the top of my head. Like I never really got into YouTube actual play. So I never really watched Critical Role. But again, I know plenty of people. Like when I mentioned like, hey, anybody familiar with this Vox Machina in my WoW guild group? Every single person was like, yeah, did we watch the show last week? What are you talking about? I'm like, oh, okay, we're all in the ecosystem. Okay, good. All right.
That's fun.
What about you?
My first foray into listening to podcasts was the Bare Naked Ladies podcast, of course, back in like 2007 or something like that.
Sheesh.
But the first podcast that I regularly was subscribed to and listened to was called the Order 66 podcast, which was about the Star Wars D20 role-playing game, Star Wars Saga Edition, which was being put out by Wizards of the Coast in like the late aughts, early 2010s. And so for a while, I listened to a lot of podcasts that were people talking about role-playing games and some actual play stuff. And then I think the first actual play thing that I really followed and listened to a lot of was when Major Spoilers, the comic books podcast, started doing Critical Hit. And I listened to a lot of Critical Hit, maybe their first season or something like that. I've been a My Brother and Me fan for a while, but I've never really gotten into the Adventure Zone because I have similar feelings to you with actual play shows where you either have to be like in it and super invested in the details and hanging on every word from the outset, or it's like you've got to catch up on a bunch of stuff that you're going to half listen to. And it's just like this, I don't know. It's a obligation that I can't really fulfill in order to like enjoy those things to the extent that I want to. So it's been hard for me to invest in things like that. I've watched a little bit of Critical Role because I was curious about it. I chat-summed a few weeks ago this thing where Matt Mercer played D&D with Stephen Colbert, which was an absolute delight. And from the little I've seen, Matt Mercer seems like an incredible DM, like a freaking rock star dungeon master. Yeah. And all the players seem like absolutely delightful RPG players. The big actual play thing that I've been into lately is, if you've been following my chatsums at the beginning of the year, I was watching a ton of Dimension 20 on Dropout TV, which is really smart about the getting you to watch an actual play thing by keeping the episodes relatively short and having tight planning around like what happens in a certain episode, alternating sort of downtime episodes and combat episodes, having really elaborately produced miniatures and maps and things like that. So it's been able to kind of like catch my focus and get me to watch it. Whereas Critical Role has more of like a live stream feel and this feeling of, well, I sort of missed the boat and now I don't really know where to start. And I think it'll be interesting to talk about this show as, is this a place to start potentially? Is like one of the questions we could maybe consider.
Yeah, it actually, funnily enough, got me to peek a little bit more into Critical Role because I was curious, like from the jump about this show, and I'm like, yeah, there are things about it that work, and we'll talk about them. But I was just like, okay, what was the vibe of the original season? And just something funny I did before we talk about the adaptation was I watched the first few minutes of the first and last episodes of this whole campaign, and it's so funny because the first episode is 2015. It's a Twitch stream archive on the Geek and Sundry like YouTube channel. The audio is like effed up for a third of it. And then they're like, I don't know. I guess like they barely know how to play D&D. It's so funny. But they do still do some, like, there's character there. There's like heart there. Yeah. And then I jumped to the last one. It's just tears. It's just everyone swearing and crying, and like it's so somber. I was like, oh my god, I just watched a whole life happen. Like several lives just happened. That's awesome. And they're like, I was jumping around the final episode, and you see like Ashley Johnson like hugging and crying into her co-host's shoulder, and you're like, oh my god. So that's something I like about like long form storytelling is you get to watch people like transform and find the characters. But this adaptation is what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. So let's do that. We'll sort of talk about different phases of the show in different chunks, and we'll timestamp it in the show notes that you know when we're spoiling what. I think, what are some good division points? I think it's good to talk about the pilot in isolation. I think you've seen up through most of episode 9, so we'll make that another division point. I've seen the whole season. Is there anywhere in between 1 and 9 where you'd want to have a point to pause and discuss a bit?
I think episode 4, which is when there's like a main like character moment in that one. Cool. That I like. That ends an arc. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the pilot, talk about the first 4, first 9. And then if you have any questions for me about the rest of the season, I can answer those.
Delicious. And then I plan on watching the rest of the season later this week, so I'll probably try to record like a little memo that we can slap in there as well.
Groovy. So let's talk about this pilot. What I have like a lot of different things I want to ask you about and talk about that are kind of related to the process of, I was really interested, especially early on in the season, in the process of adapting a Dungeons and Dragons game into a show. Because I don't think I've ever seen that anywhere else. I don't think I've ever seen, right? That I can't think of anything I've seen that's an adaptation of an RPG into a scripted narrative show.
There's an Adventure Zone comic. That's all I can think of.
Yeah, and I haven't read the Adventure Zone comic, but maybe it's a similar set of questions that I have. But I think before we even touch on that stuff, I'm just curious, how did you feel about the pilot episode? And what were your like, should you watch impressions after watching it?
So right away, the pilot gave me callbacks to another Amazon adult cartoon, Invincible, which is it's an adaptation of a Robert Kirkman comic. A Chatzpod I did long time ago, because I binged that whole show in a weekend when I was going to and from New York to see you, I think. And I watched all of Invincible, and I was like, okay, this show is really violent. This show has people cursing and like talking about sex, and like, I guess I'm okay with that because the comic it's based on had that, and it's fine that there are adult cartoons. It gets a little bit edgy sometimes, but I see what they're going for. And Vox Machina is doing the same exact thing. It puts its most abrasive foot forward, I would say. It's not to say that it's a bad pilot. It's just that it's trying to outline for you, hey, here's like the extent of where the tone is going to go. We're going to say bad words all the time. We're going to curse constantly.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to show a little bit of sex. We're going to show a little bit of nudity. We're going to show a ton of blood, like just buckets of blood. And in the context of the pilot only, it really was off-putting to me because it felt like the show was not confident enough to just tell me a story and like about adults, because like, if you're saying like I want to make an adult cartoon, then I personally don't think people need to swear every sentence. Because
I agree. Yeah.
Like that's not how these characters would talk. The thing is where this gets complicated and interesting is, well, two things. One, in the context of the pilot, D&D players swear a lot. Especially like I watched a little bit of Critical Role and they swear a lot. Like
they swear a lot, yeah.
When you play D&D, you curse all the time. Would your character curse that much though? That's where the sort of like delta between the characters and the show becomes kind of murky in this first one. Cause like I mentioned that to that same Discord group of my WoW friends, being like, I think it's weird that they curse a lot, and everybody laughed. Everyone was like, that's really funny that you think that's bad because that's what the show is. And I was like, okay, well, it sounds like when you watch Critical Role, you smush together player and character completely. But I don't know the players right now. I know these as characters, and I don't think that these characters as Fantasy World would be this, like, aggressively cursing. I don't think that they would. It just feels ridiculous. In the pilot. Just more asterisks on that, because the truth is that we'll talk about it, they figure that out.
Yeah, I felt the same as you, that it was off-putting to me, the extent of the profanity and the nudity and the like barfing. And there's just moments in the show where it's like, yeah, you did that. You didn't have to do that. I guess it's cool that you chose to do that. But that I had a similar process observation to you, where when you are doing a role-playing game, there's this ambiguity between, well, did I say that as a player or did my character say that? And you can sort of say lines in like a play session in the voice of your character that your character's not actually saying in the world, right? Yeah. You can say like, oh, fuck. And everyone knows it's funny that you said, oh, fuck, because you broke the reality of the world. But also we're just a bunch of people eating pretzels at the table, and like we're going to say, oh, fuck, and it's cool. But that has a much more damaging effect on a show where there isn't a second layer of reality that you're traveling back and forth between. There's just the consistency of the show, or we're breaking that world for the sake of like winking at the audience. And I think later episodes walk that line so much better. The show gets way better than the pilot. I think the pilot's okay, but yeah, it's just like, I don't need to watch Scanlan the gnome like balls deep in some lady type of thing. Like, come on, guys. I don't need the everybody to say, oh shit balls, what the fuck. I don't know. So that was not my favorite stuff, but it felt like they found a balance with it later
I was
on.
tapping around the pilot to find some examples, and immediately I get not like 5 seconds into this, I get their druid barfing into a wolf's mouth. And I was like, what? And then he eats the barf. Why is this like this? The show isn't this even. Like, it's so... you know what I think it is? I really think it's pilot problems. And like we talk about this on our other show, Pilot Chats, a lot. And you know, sometimes you have to be a little bit cautious when doing your pilot, that like, I need to turn every slider up, because after this I'm going to turn them down, and I want people to know how high they can go. And so this is like the show at its most crass, at its most like loud and broad, honestly. There's like just moments where every character gets to have a hero shot, jumps onto the screen and says, here's what I do. My name is Scanlan. My name is Grog, and I'm big and punchy. And it's like, the show doesn't feel like it's confident that you're going to learn to love them, so it's telling you to love them and be like, aren't they a wacky bunch of ragamuffins?
Yeah.
So I think as a pilot, it's frustrating in that way.
I think the other thing that I was intrigued by is the way in which a role-playing game as an act of storytelling is a hybrid between spontaneous sort of improv stuff and like actual planned scripted story beats. And that is the meeting of the dungeon master's thoughts and notes and the players and how they respond to those things. And there are a lot of moments, from what I understand, the way that they like wrote the script and put this together is they went through all of these episodes and kind of amalgamated different scenes, or like hit on references to different episodes. So what we're seeing here, they are plot beats from the streams that have been like refined or narrowed or combined with other moments or things like that. And what I think is sort of tough about doing that is that there are moments that work really well in a stream, in a RPG, in a spontaneous context that don't translate as well to scripted media, because doing stuff like breaking the reality a little bit by saying, oh shit, what the hell, is going to get a laugh in the moment around the table because like that's funny and that's fun. Or there, I think what it is when you make those kind of self-referential jokes at the table in the context of we're doing something spontaneous, that self-awareness is really important because it makes people feel more socially comfortable to go deeper and to commit to the characters, because it's like, I'm having fun and I can get lost in this a little bit, but I need to warm up to it. So it makes sense to me that the pilot is full of these kind of like, I'm detached from things moments, because they're warming up to like how to play and be in their characters and be in the world. And it's a very nerves. It's like a classic thing where if you're nervous in an improv set, your character throws up because you're like really nervous. Yeah. But those moments of self-referentiality in a scripted show feel self-conscious. They don't feel self-aware. They feel like you're sort of worried that your show's not good or something like that.
Exactly.
And so I think it's not necessarily bad writing because they're mining this like really fun experience they had. It's just that those things read differently in the context of a different type of storytelling.
Yeah, and I think that the pilot suffers because of that like lack of confidence, and I not having known that the show improves from there was like, okay, maybe I'll watch this because I'm curious and I do care about this, like how this is being adapted. I was like thinking about it as an adaptation. I wasn't in any way invested in like the story being told, because also it's like it's a two-parter technically. The Terror of Tal'Dorei is 2 episodes that cover one little like series of fights and adventures that they go on. So they basically take what's like a 3-hour plus episode of Critical Role and turn that into 2 30-minute things. So like the pacing is not even at its best here. I do think that show goes on to be extraordinarily well paced.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like delicious to watch, but a lot of this is like, and not to be cynical here, but it feels very corporate too. To be like, look, it's Keyleth, she's Druid, and then like you tab over on Amazon, it's like, did you want to buy Legend of Vox Machina shirts? And I'm like, I don't even know who Keyleth is yet. Like, let me like the characters before you start selling me the action figures. But yeah, it's and that's on Amazon. I don't think that's on the show, to be fair.
Well, I think that's also an RPG thing of like in the first session, everyone has their moment where they kind of give the action figure pitch of who their character is. Hey, I'm Keyleth. I'm a red-haired druid with cool horns, and I am not quite so sure about my powers, but check out what I can do. Mm-hmm. And that was maybe a monologue that the player who played Keyleth gave. So I think there is a way to sort of interpret it that way because it's on Amazon, but I think that also feels authentic to it being from the source material it's from.
Right. That's a fair point. And then the other thing I really just liked in the context of the pilot is how strong the voice acting is.
It's awesome. They're all so good at it.
It's like they're slam dunking on people. These are professional voice actors. They were on. It's Critical Role is like, here's a bunch of voice actors that are friends with each other who are just playing games, and so they are naturally fun to listen to. And that makes doing role play really easy because D&D can be fun to watch when you do the voices. I bring my own D&D experience to this. A couple of years ago, I did a D&D campaign with that same guild, WoW Guild friends. None of us even play WoW anymore. I just call them the WoW friends. But D&D is like an interesting storytelling medium because it's so non-serialized. Like it's so episodic that you would think it would like map perfectly to a show like this. But when I was watching this pilot, I was like, I need something bigger. I need something more than like we went to a village and blew something up. But thankfully, the voice acting like kept me invested in it. I mean, like look at the hit list here: Liam O'Brien and Laura Bailey as like cool, spooky twins. Travis Willingham, who's played every tough guy you've ever known in any anime, as Grog. He's also Knuckles. Ashley Johnson as Pike, like iconic video game actress. Taliesin Jaffe as Percy, who I believe I don't know him from much, but he's like in Critical Role and friends with Matt Mercer, who plays every side character, every male side character. And one of the villains later, and I think that's pretty much I think that's the main squad, unless I'm mistaken. And then there's just like every time I would check the Amazon X-ray.
Did you say Scanlan?
I'm sorry, my boy, my actual boyfriend, and yeah, Scanlan. Who's the actor who plays Scanlan? Can we look this up real quick? Oh, Sam Riegel. There you go. Sorry, Sam Riegel. Shout outs to you. Also a player in Critical Role. But like every side character is a famous person that you're like, oh, and it's usually either Felicia and Marisha Ray as Keyleth. But like, oh, that's Felicia Day as a guard, or like that's also Matt Mercer.
Yeah, Gina Torres is in the show, or like, oh my God, that's Grey Griffin playing an evil lady, like she's so good at.
That's Tony Hale as Sir Fince in the first episode.
Yeah,
like super, and then like David Tennant's like one of the villains. Like they just star-studded voice cast. So let's talk about, I guess, whether or not you watching the pilot alone felt like you should watch this.
My impression watching the pilot was, I'll give this a shot because I know that people love Critical Role. I have enjoyed the moments of it that I've seen. The voice acting is great. I thought the animation was really good. I thought the show looked cool. And there were cool fights in it. So I was like, all right, I'll give you another episode or two. I'm also doing this for a podcast, so I'm going to watch the whole thing. But it was a tentative, like, yeah, you should see if you like it. and decide for yourself, because it's doing a particular thing and it's doing that thing well. I wouldn't have called it a bad show. It just is like to a certain taste that I think there are moments later that align with that taste that I wasn't a fan of. But I think it also gets a lot better after the pilot.
Knowing that now, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, I said in my notes here, if you were a Critical Role fan, you're already watching this, you probably backed it, you're in. Similar to like when we talked about Boba Fett, it's like if you like Star Wars, then you're probably going to watch this.
Mm-hmm.
If you like D&D and you've played it, or you're familiar with Critical Role at all, and you're like, okay, people curse a lot and there's gore and sex and you're an adult and you can watch things like this, you're going to love it. Or if you're a teen and you're not supposed to watch stuff like this, but you want to, like I probably would have if I was 16, I would be like, hell yeah. If the way that the show is like a modern cartoon, a modern adult cartoon, like the way that they do jokes and stuff puts you off, you're probably good. You probably don't actually need to watch it, because it is still a comedy action show that definitely refines its pacing and like comedy later. But like there's a certain type of person that I think if they watched this pilot and didn't get anything out of it could just skip the rest of the show, to be honest with you.
So let's expand it out to the first 4 episodes. And I want to talk about 2 things.
Scanlan for the next 45 minutes?
2 things that I'm curious to get your thoughts on. The first is I want to talk about the characters and how you feel about the main cast, the members of Vox Machina. But before we do that, I want to speak a little more broadly about something that was interesting to me also about this show being an adaptation of a D&D game, which is that the show is really tropey in certain ways that I think it needs to be or function to its benefit, because you kind of want, but it's weird because it's like, does anybody watching this not know that it's from their streams? Because it's impossible for me to know if this show, I think eventually it does become like a really cool story once you get into it that functions as like, oh my God, I'm watching this cool cartoon. But a lot of the value for me came from understanding the metatextual context of like, these characters are a Dungeons and Dragons adventuring party, which is never textually said in the show, right? Mm-hmm. But like that makes the scene in the first episode where they are at a bar or a tavern and they're not meeting at the tavern, they're starting at the tavern. They get kicked out of the tavern together. Oh, they fight a dragon. Oh, these are the like obvious character classes that each character is fulfilling. And a lot of those characters are kind of the archetypical person that would be in that role in a D&D party. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there about like the tropiness of the show and the extent to which you were into that. Yeah. And like how that relates to this being like a D&D show, I guess.
I like what you said. I think something that does attract me to actual play in a big way is kind of thinking about how the characters embody, how the players embody the characters, and how they chose to make these things. And there was a lot of prep work. Like when I made my D&D character, I spent like days and days making like an inspo folder and like downloading pictures and trying to like understand what she looked like and like how she spoke.
Right.
And
Right.
There's like quizzes online that are like, how would your character react in XYZ situation? So like all of that stuff leads to what's on the screen. And, you know, sometimes that can read as very flat if you don't have that background and you don't know it as like, this is a character who like somebody worked for weeks to just make in isolation. Like they didn't make them to be an ensemble.
I think we can talk about the characters because I think that is what this leads to. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting to me was trying to think, do these characters function as characters in and of themselves? Or is there something that you lose when you lose the direct ability to see someone flip between themselves and the character, right? Because someone like Grog, for example, I'm a big beefy guy, I'm stupid, is, you know, not a new idea necessarily. His name is Grog Strongjaw. And it's like, Yeah, that's a great character to play on a D&D stream for fun, and it's like really funny to drop into the voice that's like, oh, okay, I need to do this. And then when you see Grog Strongjaw on the cartoon, it's like, well, that's kind of a tropey character.
Because the person isn't playing that, you mean?
Yeah, because you don't see the person who's like dropping into that and who made the choice to play this kind of like dopey trope. And even though it's a trope, the fact that they're like doing it and doing their own spin on it is like a really fun thing to watch. And I'm not picking on Grog because I think there are plenty of Grog moments that were fun, but I think I'm talking about this as a way to express that I'm really interested in the process of adapting like one experience into a different form of storytelling. And I felt that way about Grog and about Scanlan, where it's like you're almost losing something when you don't have the personality of the person playing them. And it's just this scripted character that kind of falls into an archetype that I feel like we've seen a lot of before, or that people play a lot of in their D&D games.
Yeah.
But also maybe that's okay, because then someone's like, yeah, I'm the big, strong, beefy guy in my D&D game. And look, there's Grog, and that's kind of what I do.
And a lot of adults who are watching this are like, yeah, that's all they wanted out of the show. And so even as the show like continues to flesh out the world and establish that these characters are like have relationships with each other and all of that stuff, it never needed to be much more complicated than they did the D&D character that I did one time. I did a strong guy. I did this is me speaking, Alan speaking. I also did a chaotic bisexual bard. Like this, everyone has that. You know, people always talk about like every friend group has the XYZ, and like all 7 of these people are in every D. These are like the most common D&D character, like twins, bisexual bard, like sad gay girl, the
edgelord steampunk guy who's
literally
the most well-developed backstory, which is the character I would play. But,
yeah, absolutely. I know that. And like that's what you do when it's your first season of Critical Role. And so I think even for in the context of Critical Role, they're like, okay, let's get people into it. We're new to this. We're new to the format. Let's just make like simple characters. I did the same thing.
Yeah,
exactly. And so to that point, I think that this like first half of the season especially is a great introduction to like what is fun about D&D. In a way may inspire you to watch Critical Role, but may also just inspire you to like get some friends together and try playing it. Because if you're like, these characters don't feel realistic, these characters, that's not how I would have done that. You can just go make this. You can make a 5e campaign and literally download like the Critical Role campaign and change the characters and do that with. That's what's like so cool about tabletop is that you have the flexibility to change the narrative and to embody characters that you like a lot, which I think is really empowering for young people who might be watching this and saying like, oh man, I love Keely and I relate to her a lot, but I would have like, you know, asked Vex out earlier or something like that. And you can just do that.
That's an interest. I hadn't considered this as, is this a good, because I'm wondering if it's a good entry point to Critical Role, and I have some thoughts about that, but I'm really curious about what you're saying. Is this a good entry point into like Dungeons and Dragons? If someone's like, oh, what Dungeons and Dragons, what's that like? Could you just tell them, go watch a couple episodes of Vox Machina? It's kind of like creating that story around the table. Do you think that works?
Of the Critical Role thing, you mean?
Like if you know someone who's like, oh, I'm kind of interested in Dungeons and Dragons, like what is that like?
Yeah.
Could you point them to the Legend of Vox Machina and say, well, you're kind of creating stories like this?
Yeah, I do think that. I do think you could do that, because that's a much easier ask than asking somebody to watch Critical Role, because I am like, we are in the age group that we could be watching it, and I have no interest in watching it personally because I don't want to watch a 3-hour video and like a 200 3-hour videos, right? I do want to play D&D.
Yes. Right.
And because I see stuff like this and I say, wow, this is so tropey, I could write this better. And I can. And that's what I think like kids and young people who watch Vox Machina, I want them to take from this is like, hey, this is pretty cool. And isn't it fun having an ensemble of like wacky friends who like each other and like get through hardships together? go do that. Go make it yourself and write your own and like do the world building. Doesn't this like vampire cult sound interesting? Well, you can do that too with this, this part of the D&D book. So I think it's like a really like low barrier to entry for caring about the D&D universe. And even though it's not branded as a D&D show, I mean, this is all stuff that could exist in like current Dungeons and Dragons. But I ultimately think that the show is a much easier onboarding than the YouTube series.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I agree with that. So was Scanlan your favorite character?
Well, it took a while, right? I think he's so abrasive early on to the point where like I see a lot of Amazon reviews in here being like, the show is annoying and I hate Scanlan. And like, it's not to say like, oh, Scanlan suddenly gains so much pathos later and you learn to understand. Like, he doesn't get that. His shittiness like has dimension to it. And he is still a character with like agency in the world. He's not just like, I make jokes and then I leave. Like, he's actually useful to the party. He uses his skills well, and he is not like a detriment to the team. Like, often when people hate a character, I think it's because it's like, oh, if they got rid of him, they would be doing so much better. But like, he's not like the sole source of all of their problems. This is like a series about like semi-broken people who want to like carve out an existence in the world. And he's just another one of those. I do think though that, it is very tropey to have
I wanted to ask you about this.
So queer characters as like heightened versions of this like is such a frustrating trope because, it often it bleeds into the real world and we feel like we have to perform for people to believe us. And I do think that there's a joke here about like Scanlan is compensating, whether it's for his height or whether it's for his ability to use magic, that he's like, I need to be ridiculous so that people take me serious, like so that people care about me and give me attention. And there's something there, but it's like mired in some tropes that like dip into, just stereotypes of queer people that I don't like. The part where I trust this show to get it though is he's not the only one. If he was the only one, I would be like, this is frustrating and they don't seem to care. Actually, they just have him in here to say that they did it. But like the world of Vox Machina is actually filled with a lot of like more subtly coded queer characters, whether it's like the merchant character with all the like the jewelry in his beard that they go up to, or like several of the guards are implied to be either non-binary or queer. And like, I already know without spoiling things that like Keeley has a thing going on, like that they don't talk about as much. So it's not that like he is a loud queer person, it's that he's a loud bard who also happens to be queer. And I think that is where it works better for me. But this is like also, I don't come to media for perfect, especially media like this, for my like squeaky clean perfect queer representation. This is not what the show's trying to be.
Yeah that's fair. I was curious about your perspective on it because I was trying to, I don't know, it just felt like we're introduced to Scanlan having sex with a woman and like all the ways that he talks about his sexuality, it's about women seemingly, and then he'll hit on like characters who present as masculine.
Yeah.
And to me, it sort of felt like this thing of, look, he's also like bisexual or pansexual. So it's like, isn't that cool? I don't know. Like, it felt like almost an afterthought to his character as opposed to an inherent aspect of his identity. But maybe I was like not reading that correctly.
You want to know what it is? It's
First
of all, the show's painting in broad strokes, and this is gonna blow your mind right now. You know who Scanlan is? Scanlan is the Todd, where his from Scrubs, because Scanlan is so horny that he loops around from being so straight to actually not being straight, and I think that trope is actually kind of funny. I'm honestly not an expert. Just because I'm queer doesn't mean I like know everything about this. But I enjoy that trope when it's handled well and people don't make fun of the character for being the way they are. I think people often tell Scanlan in the show, like, hey, quit it, relax. You're always talking about whores and whatnot. But, like, they're not judging him in any way. And so that's okay to me. But again, I don't come to this to be like, I need the perfect representation. It's not that, and it's not aiming to be that.
Sure. That's fair.
Did you have a favorite? It sounded like you liked your boy, Glasses Steampunk McGee.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of not a fair choice in that regard because clearly this is the arc that was like Percy's story. We're in his backstory area of the town of Whitestone, trying to reclaim it. He's trying to enact his revenge against the Briarwoods, who are these kind of like, it's like the guy's a vampire, the lady's a wizard. They've taken over his family home, killed his family, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the most interesting big plot things this season are related to Percy. And also I would just want to play this character. But besides Percy, I thought I really liked Pike and Keyleth. And they're kind of experiencing similar things of like, I feel like I should be connected to this kind of greater magic. I feel an anxiety about not being able to access it, a sense of self-doubt. And both of them have to figure out how to navigate that over the course of the season. So, you know, it's kind of like they're both on the same arc, but I think it's a pretty good arc. And I enjoyed seeing them navigate it. And then everybody else I thought was fun, but they didn't necessarily stand out to me, I think, because they weren't centered in the plot to the same extent that those characters were.
Right. I can tell Vex and Vax have something cool going on.
Yeah, I want to see what their whole deal is.
Love that. I think Grog is as complex as he needs to be. I don't need a like tragic Grog backstory. I think he cares a lot and has like a friendship that I appreciate. Keyleth, is one of those characters where it works well in actual play, podcasts, and shows because you give a little bit to the viewer, and then the fans, the young, impressionable fans with a lot of time on their hands, fill in the backstory. So, like, what I already knew about Keyleth, not having watched Critical Role, is, like, queer people love her. Because, like, it's so easy to map, like, different aspects of identity to this, like, anxious druid, right? Is like, oh, she's, like, worried about her abilities and feels like she doesn't fit in and she's, like, not... And people are going to find out that she's incompetent. Like, these are all very common anxieties for, like, young teenagers. And it's really easy to map a lot of different identities onto Keyleth. Whereas, so, like, her not being as filled in yet feels somewhat intentional because it's allowing the viewer to, like, have a little bit of fun thinking about the potential of Keyleth here. But yeah, I think the rest of the cast is, like, solid, and we're, like, setting up some cool villains here with the Briarwood. So, and they do the classic D&D thing, right, where a character leaves the party, because Pike leaves at the end of episode 4,
right,
to find herself. And I was like, damn, this is some good music telling me how to feel right now. I feel, even though I barely know Pike, and yet I'm sad because the show told me to feel sad.
So after the first 4 episodes, where were you at with, should you watch it or not?
The cursing thing got way better. They totally they toned it way, way, way down.
Yeah.
They still say stuff a lot. You actually also stop noticing it as much. And they even dip into, like, different genre trappings, right? There's a little bit of horror stuff in episode 4.
Yeah, there's some, like, genuinely spooky, gory stuff going on.
And
I thought that was cool.
I actually looked it up, and this is the same studio that did Invincible, the same animation studio. So the way that, like, this is such a specific thing, but the way that, like, heads get smashed against walls and explode is exactly how it looks in Invincible. And I was like, this feels eerie, but it's because it's the same studio.
I see.
And, you know, I think the violence gets a little bit more intentional here, and they start setting up some, like, religion stuff with Pike that I really was excited to see detailed. So, yeah, I think at this point, you know that this isn't going to be a villain of the week show. It's going to be a serialized season. And if you're interested in where it's going, then it's going to keep going places. So, yeah, I think you're in at this point. Do you want to transition to 5 to 8?
Yeah, so let's talk about 5 to 8 and part of 9. I think here we can sort of discuss the major just plot things of the show and the extent to which you thought those were cool or interesting. So where this ends up going, the sort of big movements are, we're in Whitestone. We are trying to overthrow the Briarwoods. We're trying to gather support from the folks who have organized a resistance in this area. And there's something up with Percy. He's got this gun. And this gun, by this point, you've seen the thing with the gun, right? Where it has the names on it? Yeah. So the gun is called the List. Which I saw this meme that was like, you know that the shorter the name of a fantasy weapon, the scarier it is, basically.
True.
And so the List has names magically written on it of the people that Percy wants to take revenge on. And so there are a few moments where his party members are like, "Whoa, dude, relax. You're being really intense right now. What's the deal?" And so they're trying to set things right. They're a little, wary of that. And that's kind of like the mid-season situation we're in. And then out of nowhere, the Grey Griffin character, Lady Briarwood, raises the dead across all of Whitestone, and we get the zombie times. And that's fun.
Yeah. I love a good travel episode, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 5 was like a chase sequence travel episode, and then they like fall off the cliff and have to like Scanlan uses his main power, which is he can astrally project a like purple hand. Very cartoonish, that works better in animation than I think it works in like describing it in D&D, because it can be really silly.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was like learning certain bard spells, and my DM would be like, "Yeah, so this is like there's like music in front of you," and I'm like, "Is it music notes, or is it like it's so hard to be like clear with stuff like that." But I think they depict his magic really well, and they start building a lot of momentum here. And I like the rebellion. A lot of Game of Thrones actors in this chunk of the show, and also Lost people. The Duke who tortures Archie is Rory McCann, who plays the Hound on Game of Thrones. There is a consort earlier who plays Ilaria Sand on Game of Thrones, and then Archibald is Charlie from Lost, Dominic Monaghan. So this is where I just kind of was spending a lot of the episodes going like, man, these zombies are wild. Whoa, that's that guy. And then episode 7, we have the Scanlan solo adventure, which gives our characters time to be apart. I think that's always hard in a like actual play context. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's always hard in an actual play context to do a solo adventure and have it feel interesting. Usually it's a one-off episode, or it's like happening while other people are taking turns elsewhere. But they managed to just make it a B plot in this that works really well. That he's trying to like burn down the Duke's house. Yeah. It does lead to like just one more joke that's a bit more vulgar than it needs to be, and it's unintentional, which is that he like jumps into a building and sees the Duke, and the Duke's taking a poo, and we see the poop come out of the Duke, and it's like, come on,
so bad. Like, what are you doing, guys?
This is the stuff where I'm like, am I too old for this? But this is an 18+ show. Like, how do I need to be 18 to like this?
I think that's like one of those things that somebody just said at the table, and it was like really funny because it's just something that they said, like, "Oh, and you see the Duke's poop come out of his butt" or something, and everyone laughs. But then it's like when you have to put pen to screen and animate that,
yeah,
it's not fun to see.
Not at all. And then. So we also, like, sort of a C plot of these episodes is that Pike is talking to her goddess, which is called the Everlight, and it's depicted in a very, like, both of us have been playing too much Elden Ring. Not a lot, but too much Elden Ring. Let's be clear, an excessive amount.
I've been playing a lot.
Yeah. I would say you're playing too much of it.
You're saying too much is more than a lot. I see.
Yes, exactly. Whatever the maximum amount is. Yeah. And it has Elden Ring vibes because it's like very celestial, and she's talking to the god, and it's telling her about like fate and and also like asking her, who are you, and all that stuff. But by episode 8, like, we get a really nuanced take on her faith here, where, you know, she's worrying about like, oh, I'm getting further away from my God because I like kill people and I party and drink with like my friends, and that's bad.
Yeah.
And I was like, is this show trying to say something about like Christianity or like just organized religion and how we like how we're like unfair and kind of like push people to bad behavior because of how much we like enforce good behavior on them, and what does that even mean? And then very quickly the God is like, what is the line? I think you wrote the line down.
Basically Pike is like, oh man, I gotta choose between my friends or like being a religious monk or whatever. And then the Everlight says, we do not choose, we walk down a path. Any path can be a holy one. And then shows Pike like, you can go hang with your friends, you can be with the priest, but like, it's not like one of these is good and one of them's bad. It's just about be who you are and be that self in like a good way, or be a good person.
Yeah. You don't have to like sacrifice all of those things. You just have to like be conscious and thinking about yourself and what your relationship to spirituality in the life that you live, which I think is something I wish like the Christian church told me when I was a lot younger. And it's something I've come to understand, but like, you know, it gets complicated when in certain sects of faith. But I thought that was like, I did not come to Vox Machina for themes, right? Well, I was like, yeah.
And the cool nuance of it is Pike making the realization that she hasn't been spurned by her God. She disconnected herself by being worried that she was doing something wrong, which I think is really cool as an idea.
Yeah, there are a lot of themes that you can tackle in actual play that can get really dicey, like disability metaphors, queerness metaphors, systemic racism and violence metaphors, like famously D&D, you know? But religion is something that doesn't get touched that much because, well, frankly, we don't talk about religion in our media that often, and when we do, it's like, it can be kind of rough these days.
Reductive, yeah.
Reductive, super reductive, yeah. But this is actually like a genuinely nuanced take that accounts for like different ways of living your life without being judgmental, that I thought was honestly very like, I would be really proud of having gotten this into a show like this.
Yeah.
If I was the person who wrote that.
Super cool moment. Yeah.
Any other big things in 5 to 8?
There were a couple moments where I thought they really hit the mark on how to adapt. There's like this one key part of the experience of playing actual play that is, I think, a tricky adaptation question, which is like people riffing at the table, right?
Yeah.
And sort of joking around on hypothetical situations, because characters aren't always going to do that. But they had a few scenes over the course of the show where the characters did that in a way that I thought was really authentic to the story and the reality of the world, while also capturing that. So like when they're talking about how to infiltrate and they decide on Scanlan going in, I think it is, everybody shares like a different plan. Well, here's my plan. Here's my plan. Or the travel episode where they're just talking at the fire. It's like, what's the weirdest thing you've ever killed? And then we get these moments where Vax like throws a knife into the face of a tiger man who falls out a window, or stuff like that. And I really like those scenes because they incorporated the comedic sensibility and the kind of like improv spirit and riffing and sort of like playing with the tropes of D&D into a moment that made sense. Yeah, these characters are going to hang out at a campfire. They're going to tell battle stories, or they're going to sit around a map and try to figure out how to break into the place. So I really like that stuff. And it's scenes like that made me, along. with other stuff that happens later in the season, that made me really want for there to be a season 2, because it seems like they crack the code to how to make this work kind of in the middle of the season here in a cool way.
Another thing I think they figure out really, really well related to that is combat. because one of the things that always burned me out playing D&D is the combat can be kind of slow, even when you're like fairly high. I know everyone always says like a lower level it's boring and then it gets better. I played it up to a fair. I don't remember how high a level I was in that campaign, but it's like move space, hit attack, do ability, and it ends up being like what you the player bring to it. But sometimes you play with people who are very mechanical focused and they just think about the damage numbers and they're like not like adding the flourish. But I think that fight scene with the whole party against the guy who's mind controlling them, who's voiced by Stephen Root, was like really dynamic and used everybody's powers really well. And then like getting them possessed and fighting each other, and like using cover and stuff. I was like, I almost wish I could play the talky parts only and then watch the fight parts. Because like I was saying earlier, as somebody who like wants to play more D&D, I watched the dialogue in this and I'm like, let me say this, let me do these, let me make those dialogue options. I would simply roll charisma and win all of these arguments. But the fights, I'm like, you guys did the fights better than I've ever done them. I could never describe a fight this well. Which is just the strength of writing and animation, honestly. So it's really, the action really shines here. And then they like slice that guy's like neck off or whatever. They like hack him open. It's really gross. I thought that was a lot, but it's also satisfying.
Yeah, I think the other thing that was really working for me in the middle of the show here that continues towards the end is, and you can tell that this comes from Matt Mercer's strength as a dungeon master, is the cliffhanger moments are really good. Like there's the one episode that ends with them in Whitestone and they see the tree where all the different people from the town have been dressed up to look like them and are hanging from the tree as like a message to Vox Machina, and the episode cuts and you're like, damn, I gotta watch the next one. That was nuts. And that's a moment where, as far as I'm aware, in the real game, Matt Mercer is like, and we'll leave it there for now. We'll see you next time kind of thing. So it was great to see the show preserve that sensibility. Or the moment where you see Percy, the smoky stuff start to happen first, and he's like going after the guy who's the carriage driver, and he shoots his hand off, and he says, your soul is forfeit, and he like kills the guy. You're like, okay, here we go. Or the moment that I made you watch so that we could talk about it, which is when Pike returns in episode 9 and they're fighting the hordes of zombies, and then this like bolt of holy light from the sky comes in, and it's Pike's astral projection of her holy self, and she's like, let's fucking go, let's kill these zombies. It's so good. And all of that, all three of the things I named are things where this is what I think the strength of the show is in terms of getting you to watch Critical Role, which is throughout watching The Legend of Vox Machina, I was like, what did this look like at the table, right? And my introduction to the show, actually the first clip that I saw was this random clip on YouTube that was comparing the moment of them seeing the people dressed up like them in the tree to the moment that happened at the table. That before we watched any of the show, I saw that comparison. And that's a really interesting rabbit hole to go down. And there are, as you might imagine, there are like super cuts that fans have put together of like, here's this scene and here's the scene that inspired it. And this part comes from here. And it's really interesting to see the players realize in real time, oh my God, that's us. Right. As Matt Mercer's describing it to them, or to see in real time the moment when Pike comes back and they bring out the computer where the woman who plays Pike is on a Skype call to be a part of the scene with them because she was like busy filming something, and that's why she wasn't there, and that's why Pike is like somewhere else. Like you just can't really. The best you can do is you can just pick the coolest moments to put in the show. But I would recommend, honestly, part of my should you watch at this point in the show is I would recommend like finding your favorite moments from this and just comparing it to what it was like at the table, because there's this magic to seeing that's so cool and so affirming of like the kind of storytelling that can happen when you get your friends around a table and you allow yourselves to get lost in something that like you've been saying, that all of us have access to if we just do that. You know?
Yeah. And it's like there's a lot of factors to getting a good like DM that can do that. I think like one of my favorite things about Friends at the Table is that like often Austin the DM will like set up a scene and like start to describe it to you, and then you can hear the players and yourself realize what they're actually getting at and like pull the curtain back because you can't see it because it's a non-visual medium. It like actually leads to going, oh my god, that's a dead body, or like that's us on there. And that actually is like a lot more intense and scary and interesting when it's described to you by a dungeon master than it is when you like. It is also really scary to see it here, and the metaphor is way clearer, quicker. But I agree, like that is something really unique and special about doing this in an actual play format. So also, just again the Scanlan check-in. There's a gag in episode 5. I forgot to mention it, where he drinks a bunch of potions and they keep doing different things, turning into different things, and they do a gender swap potion. And this is called pandering, folks. This is bait. And you need to stay strong and not fall for it, because yes, female Scanlan is super hot, but this is the kind of thing that led to me realizing things about myself as a kid. So like if kids watching this are like, what's going on with Scanlan? I'm so happy for you and good luck. But it's like so tropey. Like go on Tumblr and just look up Critical Role gender swap, and like there's a literal like
I'm sure.
It's not Rule 34. There's a different rule that means like if it's like Rule 63 as a rule for every given male character there's a female version. This is a thing. It's like they always do this, and I was like, come on, I'm falling for it. I'm eating out of your hands, but I'm not liking it. I was judging them really harshly for that. But yeah,
funny.
good show, TBH.
Yeah. Do you? Okay.
Greg Griffin and Matt Mercer as vampire spouses is goals somehow.
Yeah, awesome. The two of them are great as the bad guys. Do you have any questions about the rest of the season that I could answer for you? Not spoilery.
So I know that they set up a second season because they already got confirmed for one.
Yeah.
Does it end satisfyingly?
Yes. Yep. Everything is resolved in this season. This arc concludes, and whatever you have a question about in your mind is resolved. And then it's sort of like they immediately kick the door open to be like, and now season 2. See you later.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
You're saying the things I like. The things I know also are from watching the end of Critical Role season 1 are like they do the thing every fantasy tabletop game does, where it starts really small scale, and by the end they're like, okay, so you killed God and you ascended to the throne of God, and you're like, wait, Keyleth? I don't remember her specifically. I'm not here to spoil Critical Role for folks, but that's what I can tell is going to happen if this show goes on for like many seasons. But yeah, I want to see. Do you have an implication at the end of season 1 of who they're going to focus on next?
I think so.
Okay.
I bet you they're gonna do like a Vex and Vex thing.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it.
That's my guess, which would be cool. That's what I'm most curious about.
I want to emphasize, I genuinely would not have watched this show at all. It would have skipped me over if you hadn't recommended it. So just coming into it here, I'm like glad I watched it, and I'm glad I have a new fun fantasy show to watch. Because like, I loved and still love Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, all of that. And The Dragon Prince was some of those showrunners' follow-up to that on Netflix. And I liked that show for a while, but I just don't think that it had the cast that this does. which is where I fell off of it. I watched 2 of the 3 seasons of it. I didn't even think to watch the 3rd season of it. But this, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. I'm like in for the long haul with these guys because it's so, like you said, it's so watchable. Like even when it's not really super duper nuanced and like serious or full of like themes and richness, it's still like very fun to look at. The voice acting's amazing.
Yeah.
You can tell it's coming from a strong writers team. Like it's so competent.
Yeah, definitely. The ending's really good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's really good.
I will I'll tell you how I feel about it.
Can you just say what you're wanting or predicting right now? Because I think you're gonna be just say those things.
I want that. Which one's the girl? The girl twin. Vex.
Vex.
Are you sure? I thought it was the opposite.
Vex.
Okay.
Sorry, Vex.
I want Vex and Keyleth to kiss. I want I want the vampire people to get killed.
Okay.
And I want them to like have to go somewhere. I want them to be like a whole new place that they have to, like a different continent or something.
Okay.
That's my wants.
Okay.
They say that every character should have wants, so I do.
Everybody gets something really cool to do in the last couple of episodes.
Oh, I love cool.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So you should watch it.
Sounds like a plan. You should watch it?
Yes. That's my ultimate takeaway is honestly, the more I watched of this, the more confident I was that people should watch it.
Damn. Okay. I like the words you're saying. Chat's actual play podcast starting in 3, 2, never.
Damn. I would love to be in an actual play show that somebody else was in charge of doing all the work for.
Like you just want to talk and be funny and weird and roll dice and then go home.
Yeah.
That's basically what I don't know what the cast in Critical Role, like what they all contribute besides.
Well, they all share like,
production
the duties of running and producing their show. So
okay.
I don't mean to imply that they don't do anything, but I would.
That's
do
what you
nothing.
want to do. If I was on an actual play show, I would simply do nothing. Easy.
Well, folks, thank you for listening to Should You Watch and considering whether you should watch it or not. I've been Magellan. This has been Alan. We've been Chats. And we'll let you know what we're going to do for next month at some point on our main feed for Chats. We're still trying to figure that out. So, yeah. And then we'll do another show at the end of next month. But until then, thanks for TV.
Thanks for TV. Thank TV for TV. Hey, Should You Watch listeners? This is Alan talking about the last 4 or 5 episodes of The Legend of Vox Machina Season 1. My overall thoughts on the season now that I finished it. And also I can announce here what we're watching next month for Should You Watch. So stay tuned for that at the very tail end. First off, these last 5 episodes are primarily concerning the Ziggurat arc as the gang of adventurers goes through this underground ziggurat beneath the town and chases after Lady Briarwood. And they have, astral projected Pike and the rest of the crew are going through. Everybody kind of gets their big D&D moment. And I think the 2 biggest things I liked here were the parts where you can tell that the combat, like the rolls in the original version turned out really well. The most emblematic example, I think, being when Grog dives through some acid to go get something, and astral projected Pike heals him through the burning of the acid. And it's just such a cool image and such a creative idea to do that in your D&D show. Like if you're going to use your healer, you're going to do it in a cool way. I also thought some of the villain stuff was a little bit tropey by the end. Introducing an Eldritch Horror at the bottom of the underneath the town is like super duper tropey. And maybe as a sort of addendum to the Should You Watch question, it's like if you are coming for something that's like doing something wildly different and new, The Legend of Vox Machina is just not going to do that for you. But I also really loved the thematic work they did here with some of the characters' arcs, with Percy especially, kind of confronting the demons inside of him. I think, it's a really easy, again, trope to make your depression and your trauma into a demon, but it mostly works here because they don't make that too explicit. It's kind of like you have something bad inside of you, and to get it out, you have to like power your will through it. And, there's something there to be said about like how we use community and like our friends to pull us out of our worst moments and who we are at our worst selves. But it's super not nuanced. But I still enjoyed all of that. And I thought the fight with the demon inside of him was really cool. I thought most of this ended pretty well. I wasn't too annoyed with any of it. I liked the D&D-ish aspects of it. In terms of the ending, it was really cathartic to see Pike no longer astral projected, like to just see her with the rest of the crew when they go through the tree at the end. And it was great to see Keyleth getting to be a character and like getting to do cool things. I loved that little nod between her and Vex at the end where you're like, oh, there is something going on here, just like I predicted. And then finally, I think that like whatever the ending of like, oh, there's dragons is like a little goofy, but when they're like, oh, what happened to the eldritch horror we left in the dungeon, and the leader of the town's like, I don't know, we'll find out, and like a guy gets slurped into it and his skin melts off, you're like, okay, that's exactly how that D&D campaign ends. Is like you set up the next one, but you tease out something and say like, okay, but we did finish what we tried to do. So overall, really liked it. And as a final, should you watch, I would say everything we've said already still applies. And finally, it wraps up really well. So you can go into it knowing that the show has a solid ass ending. Want to hear what we're watching next month, folks? Well, it's April. It's wacky season. It's goofy season. Majel and I are both big comic book fans, and we are not always entirely caught up on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but sometimes they put out shows that catch our interest. And in April, actually on March 30th, 2022, they aired the first episode of Moon Knight on Disney+. And that, folks, is what we're going to be watching for April for Should You Watch. The whole season will not be out by the end of April. It will literally be on the week of the last episode, I think, because it's going to be a 6-episode season. But we're going to watch what is out up until we have to hit our recording day for April. And we'll get to see Oscar Isaac, dual personalities, crime fighter. I've read a lot of Moon Knight comics back in the day, and I like the character a lot. I think you can do a lot of weird things with it. I mostly just want to see Oscar Isaac be wacky and do funny voices. Do I think this is going to be good? I don't know. Hopefully. But yeah, we're watching Moon Knight next month, folks. So thanks for listening. Peace.